Hey everybody, welcome to the In All Things podcast. It's time to see God in everything. How's it going, everybody? Welcome to a brand new episode of the In All Things podcast. My name is Mitch Frost. I'm here with Pastor Steve Markle. How's it going?
It's going great.
Anything to share with us today about your morning so far?
I mean, I shoveled snow for the first time this year.
Wow,
That's
what
exciting.
a day.
Yeah.
What a day. We risked our lives to be here today, so this better be the best episode we've ever recorded.
I know. Is it a level 1 now? Did it downgrade?
I don't know.
But the roads weren't that bad.
Yeah. Well, if you aren't in the Ohio area,
Yes.
which probably isn't many of you, but we got hit with pretty bad snowstorm last night.
Huh.
So
Yeah,
I mean, it wasn't terrible.
Yeah.
But it was the first big one of the year.
Yeah. So there's a lot of hype and everybody
right.
freaking out. So yeah. But it did affect you last night.
It did. Yeah. We had to cancel our student ministry, but it was like kind of a last second decision because all day we kept obviously checking the radar, hearing that it was going to be bad, but it was like, oh, it's not going to be bad until 8 or 9. So don't worry about it. And then I was kind of leaving the house and getting ready to drive here, and I was like, from inside, I was like, oh, it's just raining, so it's going to be fine. And then I got in my car, and I was like, my whole car's frozen. My windshield's frozen. There's ice everywhere. But, hey, we'll see how it goes. Yeah. And I drove to the church and slid like 4 times.
Right.
And then there was a couple liters already here, and I was like, yeah, we shouldn't
that freezing
do this.
rain is worse than the snow. So.
Yeah. And then it snowed on top of it.
So it was the right call, but just, yeah.
But anyway, we're here. But yeah, the bar's high because, it's our day off. It's Martin Luther King Day.
Yes.
But we're here. We're recording an episode. We had to shovel our driveways and our cars to get here. So
such sacrifice.
This has got to be a good one. Okay.
All right.
I'm raising the expectation for you.
For you too.
Okay.
All
fair
right.
enough. But anyway, it's Martin Luther King Day.
Yes.
So I just wanted to talk about that for a moment, just kind of what that represents. And who he was a little bit.
Right.
How much do you know about Mr. Martin Luther King Jr.?
Well, I'm older than you, but
true.
I was not alive during his time. Of course, I was born in the 70s, 12 days into the 70s.
Right.
But, of course, his time was before that. But, I mean, his legacy is unbelievable and what he did. Just watching some news this morning and listening to people talk about the impact he made, and it still is making.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's crazy because for you, only 4 or 5 years before that was when he was assassinated.
Right.
So I mean, it was like before.
Yes.
That's crazy.
Yes.
I've yet again, as we talked about some different historical events. For me, it was mostly history class in high school where I learned about him.
Right. Me too. For him. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
But yeah, and it's crazy because people who knew him well and were there during his whole life are alive now. Some of them, and his children are alive.
Yes.
And so they talk about him and just the reputation that he has, who he was, everything he stood for is pretty awesome. It's something to marvel for sure. And so I did a little bit of just research, reminding myself of some of like his life, the big moments of who he was. Born January 15th. Okay, so 2 days ago.
Okay.
Today's the 17th.
All right.
1929 in Atlanta, Georgia.
Right.
So that's when he was born. And then he was assassinated April 4th, 1968. So 2 years before you were born. So you just missed him.
Yeah, I mean he'd be 93, I guess,
or 93. Yeah,
my grandmother was born the same year. She's still living, but it's pretty amazing.
It is.
Yeah.
And all throughout school, everything you read says that he was just like top of his class every year. He skipped 2 grades before he graduated high school, just because he was so advanced at everything that he did. And then he graduated from high school. And the whole time he was actually pretty skeptical of Christianity. I don't know if you've heard this.
No.
But his dad was a preacher.
Right.
And so he was raised in the church and everything, but as he kind of grew up and graduated high school and went to college, he was just kind of skeptical, didn't really know if it was his thing.
Right.
And then he ended up going to some revival service with some friends in college, and he got saved, and then he went into ministry. So he went to seminary, he became a preacher.
Right.
I mean, as we know from some of his speeches, he was an awesome communicator,
Oh,
very, very gifted with that.
Right.
And so he was a pastor, preacher, did all of those things, very similar to us. And then Rosa Parks happened. So we know the story of Rosa Parks. She wouldn't give up her seat. She was arrested. She spent the rest of her life in jail. When that moment happened, that was what actually propelled him to step into the civil rights movement.
Okay.
When he saw that take place and everything that happened there, he decided, you know what? Because of my gift of speaking and leading, I'm going to step into this position and speak up for these things.
Right.
So that's where he started, which is pretty cool. And then the first thing that he actually changed was buses.
Right.
So that was pretty awesome as well.
Wow.
But I didn't know that. I didn't
know that.
I was like, oh,
it's been such
interesting.
a while since I actually studied history. History's never my best subject in school. So,
Yeah.
but the thing that stands out to me is his message was always of love. It wasn't a hateful message. And so much of that has gotten diluted today too, and really changed into so much hate in all of the racial conflict that we have.
Yeah, both sides. It's
yeah, absolutely.
Very hateful and heated a lot of the times. And if you read quotes from him or watch speeches of, it's like, oh my gosh, like the
They're
only
golden.
thing he did
His
was
quotes
love.
are so good.
So good, and there's so many of them. Too.
I know.
Yeah. And then as he got into the civil rights movement and really stood up for different things, he was jailed 20 times for standing up and
Wow.
speaking. He was stabbed in the chest at one point. His family's house was bombed. While his family was inside, he was actually out of town speaking somewhere a couple hours down the road, and his family's house was bombed in the middle of the night. And this was the coolest. I watched a whole documentary on this just to remind myself of his history, and this was one of my favorite stories. His house is bombed. Everybody's okay somehow.
Okay.
And all of his supporters that were kind of rallying with him at the time show up to his house with guns and with bats, and they're ready to go because this is obviously a horrible thing that just happened. And he finally gets there and he stands up in front of all of them and he's like, "No, we're not gonna riot. We're not gonna get angry. We're gonna love them back." And everybody's like, "Holy cow!" And the people who were in that crowd are still alive today, and they talk about like that's the moment we realize like, okay, this guy he's the real deal. Like what he stands for is huge.
That's why he's respected by everybody on both
absolutely.
sides of of political sides and every race. I mean, I never heard anybody, white or black or any color, that has put down the Reverend Martin Luther King Jr. No.
Yeah. And then in 1964, he became the youngest man ever to win the Nobel Peace Prize.
Okay.
Which is pretty awesome.
Wow.
And then after that, they passed the I don't know the official name for it, but they finally gave colored people the right to vote.
Voting
in
rights.
1965. That happened with Lyndon B. Johnson.
Right.
But that's what happened afterwards was the marches on Selma.
Right.
Because even though that passed in terms of our government, they still didn't really have the right to vote.
Right.
The government officials would keep them out of voting areas. Sometimes their votes wouldn't even be counted. And so even though they technically...
And certain regions of the country were worse than others.
And so what happened was then they had these marches where they marched from Selma to, I believe, I'm forgetting where they went, but a big capital.
Yeah.
And they just walked for miles and miles and miles and miles, and they changed the whole voting system. So it was pretty amazing. Me and Lexi watched Selma, the movie, on Friday night because they were showing it in theaters all weekend, but we watched it at home, which is awesome.
A great example of peaceful protest, right? Of how you can protest something and get a point across, get it made, and get change.
Yeah, and that's a big thing that he stood for. And he said from the beginning of his whole movement was he realized how much could be done just from, getting people together for the same cause. But he does have quotes on the fact that, rioting and those types of things are the voice of the unheard and all these things. And so he did stand for, just everything. But he was awesome. Right. And the movie that we watched was really, really good about him and his life. But it was just good to really get into who he was because it's kind of my first experience with all of that. But today's an exciting day. And it's good.
Yeah, it is. It's a great day. One of my favorite movies of all time is Remember the Titans, which, as I know, watched, and it takes place in the early 70s, right after Martin Luther, not long after his death, I guess. But it was in the Northern Virginia, Alexandria, Virginia area, and it was when they first put kids in school together. And everybody's watched that movie, but it really just gets me stirred up emotionally for civil rights and for equality. I love the message of that and how people can come together like they did in that movie.
Right. And as we know, most people know that he was assassinated on the balcony of his hotel room. I actually didn't know that.
Right.
But he walked outside of his hotel room one morning and was shot.
Right.
So by, what's his name? James Earl Ray. Is the name of the guy. But died very early. I only can imagine. He's one of those people that makes you wonder how much he could have done if he would have lived a full life. Would he still be alive today?
That's
possibly.
True. Who knows?
But anyway, there's a lot of conversation around Martin Luther King, all the things that he stood for, especially this time of year. But it's important to keep that in our minds all the time. But just because he changed so much and really pushed the limits of a lot of equality, like you said, and rights for everybody, doesn't mean that the fight is over. I think that's one misconception that some people sometimes like to believe is that, well, they had these big moments like that, and Martin Luther King stood for all this, and so everything was solved after that moment. But
we wouldn't be where we are today if that was true. But,
right. And so, yes, it was an amazing movement for people of minorities everywhere when Martin Luther King stood for that and everything that he did. And there's been people like him, but maybe not to his level of impact and respect. Correct. But it doesn't mean that the fight is over, right? We can all agree that America is in a very divided place, and there's lots of tension that comes with racial inequality and racial relations. And just here's a disclaimer. You and I have never experienced those types of things. And so it would be wrong for us to sit here on a platform like this, on a podcast like this, and talk about like we know the ins and outs of racial inequality and oppression and all those types of things. We don't. We don't know what it's like, and so we don't want to pretend that we do.
No,
right?
no. That's why. I mean, even this conversation, I love having it, but it also makes me nervous because I don't want to say anything that even gives implication that I know what I'm talking about when it comes to putting myself in somebody else's shoes like that I've not been there.
No.
And so I don't want to say anything insensitive or overly sounding wise when I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, we haven't been there. Our families haven't been there.
Right.
We just haven't experienced what it's like to live in the shoes of Martin Luther King or any of his family members or anybody like that.
Yes.
And so, just for those of you listening and watching, we are excited to at some point sit down with somebody who knows better than us, because I think you and I are both eager for education on the topic and more perspective on the topic.
Right.
But you and I can't give that, right?
Right. And I think too, the news is so off the center. It's so far to the left or so far to the right, depending on what you watch, and it's so biased that it's hard to get accurate information that you can trust. And I mean, there's some people I listen to that I trust, but still, I want to hear from people that are actually experiencing things and that can speak to that. So
stay tuned for that.
Yeah,
we are very excited for that.
Yeah.
But today's not going to be that conversation.
That's good.
First and foremost, though,
I'm relieved.
From a biblical perspective, I do want to talk about it for a moment. Was racism something that America invented whenever we discovered America? Is that how it happened?
I think you know the answer.
Did
to that
we
question.
coin the term of racism?
I don't think
and
so.
invent it because we just wanted to?
No, I think you know the answer to that. It's one of those questions. In the Bible, obviously you see it. I mean, Paul had to address it. There's neither Jew nor Greek in the eyes of God. Everybody is equal in God's eyes. But people absolutely had race issues all throughout the Bible. Yeah.
Yeah, it's not something that we came up with, right? Or something that, this would be fun to do this, right?
No.
It's been there. It's something that is in the Bible. The Bible speaks to it. And we may have a whole episode on that, just dissecting the different ways that the Bible talks about it.
You look at specifically the way the Jews hated the Samaritans. And there's so many stories, even, relative to Jesus that he shared, like how people were so mean and hateful and how he broke down barriers and people were like, what are you doing?
Yeah.
Okay.
People thought he was crazy, right? Because
exactly.
he was stepping over racial and cultural lines to prove and display the fact that what he was coming to bring, the message that he was delivering, was for everybody.
Yes.
Right?
Right.
And that's something that is, I don't think you can properly read the gospel or the Bible, especially New Testament, and not see that that's there. The fact that, they were really breaking down racial barriers and trying to say, hey, this message, maybe at one point it was for a specific group of people, and that's the way we interpreted it, but not anymore. It's Jesus came for everybody.
That's correct. Yeah.
And the story that you brought up of the Samaritans, we have the very famous story of the woman at the well.
Right.
And Jesus literally went to this well out of their way. They was not on the path of their journey. They go to this well, and Jesus sits with this woman who his own disciples, the whole town, thought he was crazy for even talking to her, because not only was she different racially than him, but her own people didn't even like her. Well, she had a terrible reputation too.
And also in the culture back then, it was wrong, but men didn't talk to women out in broad daylight like that.
So he broke so many rules.
It wasn't just racial, it was gender, it was all that stuff that they were like, what are you doing? Yeah. So
it's just, it's something that you can't really separate from the gospel, in my opinion.
No.
If we really do believe that Jesus died for all people, he came for all people, then his message is for all people, right? And if we're trying every single day to mold ourselves to be like him, then that's something we have to keep in our minds at all time. But hey, we're going to have this conversation in depth at some point very soon with somebody who has a perspective that you and I don't have.
That sounds good.
But this does bring an interesting topic to the table. I want to talk about for a few moments today the problem of perspective. Where do you think I'm going to go with this? Do you have any guesses?
Well, no, I really don't. I know you love to surprise me, so.
I do. I like to keep you on your toes. But the problem of perspective, I want to talk about this for today's episode because I think it's really, really important, especially when we're kind of starting this conversation around Martin Luther King Jr. and all those types of things. There's a problem in every human being where we think, even if we don't realize it, we think that our way of doing things or our way of living is the only way or is the only right way. And even if we never say this out loud or we never tell anybody this or we never even realize it in our own hearts, I think we all struggle with this to some degree. Would you say that's true or not true?
Oh, absolutely. I agree.
Where or how have you seen that true with your own life?
Well, I feel like often I'm in the middle of the sandwich in terms of generations in my family, because we do a lot with our family. And I have my parents and my grandmother, and then I have my children and their children. So it's awesome. But my parents' perspective and then your age perspective, it's different. It just absolutely. And I feel like I'm supposed to keep understanding what they're saying, and I know why they're saying what they're saying, and understand what you're saying, and try to not let it all just become opinion. And my opinion is more important because I'm older, mine's more important because I'm younger, and you guys don't understand. Trying to bring that all together is stressful. And then, as pastor of a church, knowing that every time I preach, I can't just think, oh, well, I'm 50. What do 50-year-olds think? I got to think what do 20-somethings think, what do 70-somethings think, and it's a challenge. But bringing that perspective of talking to different people at different ages and understanding that, bringing that together, bringing it, back to the Bible, all that matters.
Do you think that this is something that everybody struggles with, or just the people who maybe are in those sandwich generations or have those older and younger influences on them? Or do you think everybody everywhere has this kind of inside idea that to some degree, hey, the way that I'm doing things or the way that I live is the best way to do it, or maybe the only way to do it?
I think everybody struggles with that to some extent. I think that we're in a position as pastors where we don't have the option, because I think in and of itself, it's selfish. I mean, to not consider how other people think and to think that our way is the best way. And I think, all of us need to be open-minded to hear and to learn other people's perspectives. But I do think that that most people, unless it's your job to study culture and to really understand all the different generations, you learn how you want to do things in life and what your perspective is. And it's, it's like anything. If you just listen to the same people talking all the time, you listen to the same newscasts all the time, you read the same things all the time, you're going to think that way and act that way. If you surround yourself with just the same people that are just like you don't understand the rest of the world very well. Yeah,
absolutely. It's a very hot topic word to say right now of echo chamber. And a lot of people talk about echo chambers right now and how basically, if you don't know what that means is you are in an echo chamber when you surround yourself with people who think like you, look like you, and talk like you. And so everything that you say, everything that you feel is going to be echoed back to you because the people you're surrounded with on a close level feel the exact same way. And the problem with living in an echo chamber all the time is that you don't see the rest of the world. Right. And even if you think you do, or oh man, I'm learning about this topic. Well, you're actually learning about it from a perspective that's the same as yours. Right. So it's really, really, really tricky.
It is tricky. Yeah. It challenges me all the time. I get frustrated by it when I hear people maybe people talk about they're in a small group even, and somebody says something that's different than the opinion of the majority of the group. And they're like, I can't believe they said that. Well, why do you think they said that? I always ask questions.
Right.
Why do you think they said that? What do you think their background is? Something may have happened in their life that make them think that way. So don't just judge that right away without trying to understand that.
Yeah. It's vitally important.
I
really, really believe it is. And it's something too, like it's been proven time and time again that our phones at this point, social media technology, they will give you, news articles. They'll give you Google searches. They'll give you people to follow that are curated and based on the other things that you like. And so
Correct.
our own culture, technology, all of the things is building this idea that we can live in one world with one perspective, right? And that's, I mean, it's everywhere. And the news stations that you watch, the things that you're into, they're just repeating and regurgitating the things that you already know and believe.
Right.
But there's a bunch of other perspectives that maybe would say other things, right?
That's
but
right.
you're like, oh, I'm never going to listen to them because I see it this way. But what would it look like if we stepped outside of our comfort zone, outside of our perspective, and started to see other things, right? Because there's other things out there.
It's a real dilemma for us because, we can't be ignorant of the news. We can't be ignorant of what's going on. But where do you get your news? Like, I'll flip back and forth between different stations, and they can be talking about the exact same thing, and the story is exactly the opposite, like bias to it. Like, where is the middle ground? And we have to be able to take that and be able to listen for the truth and try to dissect the truth. But that's not easy for us to do. And we're, there are settings in ministry where you feel this pressure. Like, you can hang out, like you said, the echo chamber, where you want to hang out with people that say the same things that you're saying because it feels good, right? It feels good.
It's easy. It's
more
easy that way.
It is. Who likes just being challenged all the time? Right. And it doesn't mean it's not good to have people that think the same as you in your life. It just means, but there also is this point of, I need to hear other perspectives.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Like, on a very small scale level of this, and maybe you have a similar story that you can remember, but like, I remember the first time, probably 4th or 5th grade, and I've come from a home with siblings, 2 parents, married, all of the things, and just had an awesome life. Really, I'm very thankful for that. But I remember the first time realizing, like, wait, my friend, his dad's not in the picture. Right. What? Why? Like, that doesn't make any sense. His parents are divorced. Wait, what? Like, and just kind of like realizing for the first time that not every family looks like mine, right? And just because I'm very lucky to have a family like mine doesn't mean that everybody has that story and that take on their life. And the fact that he didn't have a dad in the picture probably led to so many different things in his life that I never have to feel. Right. And if you start to go down that path, you realize, man, there's so many variables and details of people's stories and lives that make everybody's perspective different. That's right. You can't just assume that yours is the only one. No, right? No, I don't know if you have any memory of that or any stories like that where you realize, like, man, people's experiences are different than the one that I'm living.
I mean, similar to you, I grew up the same way. Just awesome family. Parents have been married 53 years now, and just a upper middle class maybe, but just good life. And then when you do come across people that have had different than you, my 16 years before I moved to Ohio. So I've been here almost 11 years, but the 16 years before I was in Northern Virginia, right outside of DC. And that time is so valuable for me and my family because it exposed me to so many different people from so many different backgrounds, different cultures, different races. Whereas here it's more static. But there it was just constantly meeting different people from different backgrounds economically, but racially, and a lot of military people that have moved all over the world. And I've had in my life just kind of much more stability than a lot of people have had. So I think that just adds to the perspective. Yeah,
I think that's a big word, stability. I think you and I both have a perspective and an upbringing of stability, and some people just don't have that. I remember my brother telling me he is a teacher, phys ed teacher, and in the school district that he was in before the one he's in now, I remember at one point we were hanging out and he was talking about, it was like very early on in him teaching there, and he was like, I just can't believe how eye-opening it is to see the different like homes that these students come from. We were like, oh, like, what do you mean? And he was like I have multiple students in my class that basically are homeless at this point, and the only time that they get lunch, the only time that they get a real meal is at school. Right. And it's like, whoa. Right. And then he was just had example after example of students, real lives of kids even, that, oh yeah, last night this girl came in at school. She told me, yeah, last night my mom, she was high and she couldn't even talk to me. So I had to get food on the table for my 3 brothers. Right. And she's like 11 years old. Right. Like it's just this idea, like, and then you if you take that even further, then how do we expect them to hear, about God being a father or God being good or God being all these different things, because it's challenging for other people with different perspectives to say that that's true. That's right. Right? For you and me, right? We were raised good. We had good parents. We had a good father figure. We had stability in our lives. So when we attach those things to the figure of God, it's easy for us. That's right. But for some people, it's not as easy.
No, that was a challenge as youth pastor too, because you're going through that now, but yeah, not every kid has that.
Right.
Yeah.
And
right.
recently, I know you were there too. We with the Brock Strong Foundation, we did
Right.
something for an inner city school in Columbus.
Right.
And when Christy Johnson went there the first time to kind of look at the school and meet some people, she was just kind of asking questions about the students and things like that. And the principal said, "Do you see that bench over there?" And Christy was like, yeah, of course I see that bench over there. And the principal was like, yeah, a daughter and a mother live on that bench. And she wakes up and walks over here to school.
Right.
And Christy was like, "Wait, that's real? Like this is real life in our community, in our circle.
Right.
This is happening, right? And just think about how everywhere that is."
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, it is. And I mean, so everybody has different perspectives from stuff that's happened in my life, the way they were brought up, and part of being a pastor, but I think more than that, part of being a Christ follower is digging into their lives and trying to understand different people from different perspectives, and that's a challenge.
It's challenging. I heard I can't remember where it was, but it was on a podcast. I think one of my favorite ones might have been Levi Lusko's, but he was interviewing somebody who was talking about this idea of perspective. It's been a while since I've listened to it, but he kind of asked this question of, when's the last time you've read a book or listened to a podcast or watched something from a perspective led by somebody that you don't agree with, or somebody that is raised completely different than you, or somebody who lives in a different country than you? Like, when's the last time you've done that? And it was kind of like, wow, that's challenging, because for some of us, I don't think we have a last time since we've really done that.
No, I think too, like the culture, the spiritual culture we grew up in, and mine especially, I would say, it was more like we don't want to risk a young mind being influenced by something that's wrong or off, and we don't want anybody to read anything that could influence them to think differently. So let's just always read stuff that reinforces everything we already know and already believe, with the fear that if I read a book that's written by an atheist, I might become an atheist. Well, no, I'm not going to. Okay. But I think sometimes when you understand people that think differently, it helps you to maybe even know what you believe more. Right. Yeah.
There's this whole idea right now that's everywhere. This idea of deconstructing your faith, and this whole idea that it is important. There's I don't know if you know Paul David Tripp. He's an older scholar that writes. He's written a bunch of books, but he talks about how each and every Christian has to come to a point where they deconstruct their faith. And his whole point is deconstruction doesn't have to be bad. The whole point of deconstruction, for those of you who are like, what the heck does that mean? This whole idea that what you were given as you were raised by your parents, or just kind of pushed on you as ideals or beliefs, right or wrong, this kind of stuff, you have to explore it for yourself. And sometimes you're going to find like, hey, I've been told this for years and it wasn't actually, like, it's not in the Bible. It's not true. This was just a cultural thing or a church thing that got pushed on me. And I don't actually believe that, right? Each and every one of us have to come to this point where even the perspective of others, the way that we were raised in church, or if you don't go to church, like, we have to come to a place where we dissect it ourselves. Right. And we were meeting with somebody last week, and you were talking about how you had this big moment of realizing that you could wear, ripped jeans or something like that. I don't remember where this was, but and you were just saying, like, it was kind of this moment that you had in your denomination or the way that you were raised, where you realized that, like, man, actually life is a lot more free than what I've been told for a long time.
Well, yeah, I remember in college, even at a conservative Christian college, even exploring my faith more, and some of the things that I grew up with that were more conservative, and even things that were like, that's not what that means. That verse was used wrong. Like, that's not what the intent of that scripture was. So, yeah. And coming back to even what we started with today, I mean, there's a verse that talks about not being unequally yoked in relationship. And I grew up in youth group that was told that means if you're white, you should not date or marry a black person, because that's unequally yoked. That is not at all what the Bible teaching there.
Yeah, and I just think there's examples like that everywhere, even outside of the faith. And so let's bring this in.
Okay.
What do we do about this problem of perspective? Obviously, we can say, okay, we need to start listening to some people that are different than us. Yeah, that's great. But biblically, right, does the Bible speak about this? Does the Bible talk about this idea of being open-minded, hearing different perspectives, or is there anything like that you can think of that maybe we could really pull from Scripture?
That's a good question. Well, I mean, you look at Jesus first, I think, and his example of always trying to relate to the people that he was speaking to, right? He spoke to different crowds. People followed him, but he would go into different environments, but he would always try to relate to what their perspective was. If, they were hungry, he was going to feed them. If they had some type of physical need, he did healing. He taught, and he confronted the Pharisees when they need to be confronted. So, I think it's not one size fits all. I think that sometimes we, again, going back to our echo chamber, we're like one size fits all. This is, I want to know exactly, and I want everybody like me, and then we have the answers.
Yeah.
No, the answers, the truth is the same. Biblical truth, the gospel, that doesn't change. Doesn't change. But the way we talk about it with certain people in our lives that we come in contact with, I think has to be, there's different ways to package it. That's why there's, more than one sermon, more than one way to share the gospel.
Right.
The gospel truth is still the same what Jesus did, and it's grace alone, all of that. But I still think though, so yeah, I think you have to, our whole theme is in all things. God works in all things. And so I think when you think about perspective, it's saying, okay, in all things means in everything that you're going through and that he's going through and that the people in my life are going through. So I need to learn from them. You brought up the Brock Strong Foundation earlier. I was thinking about perspective. Terry and Christy Johnson have a perspective on losing a child that I don't have. And there's sometimes, because we're such close friends with them, there's times when I don't understand how it feels in their life and what they're going through, and it's just a perspective that I can't speak to, but I can try to empathize and understand as much as I can and be sensitive to. And everybody that we encounter in life has something that's different than us. I mean, even though we were raised the same, we're different. We have different things that affect us differently because of other things that have happened in our lives. So therefore, I think this whole conversation is about seeing God in all things, but it's seeing God that he works in different ways with different people. Yeah. And if we're going to be followers of Jesus, we look at his example and how he loved and how he confronted and how he was compassionate, and he had all these different qualities that we should strive for in our lives.
Yeah, I think you hit on something really huge of saying, I could never speak to that, but what I can do is empathize with that.
Right.
I think maybe what we're called to do in situations like what we brought up at the beginning of this conversation of racial inequity in our country, you and I can never speak to that.
Right.
But what we can do is we can empathize. We can try our best to sit with them and to feel what they're feeling, because you and I will never feel it, right? And that, like you said, somebody has everything. Everybody has something, something that they have going on that you and other people will never feel, right? And so if we have a situation like that, whatever it may be, losing a child or anything, but we just say, man, I can never speak to that. I hope I never have to speak to that, because it is painful and it does hurt and it is something that, is different than my perspective. But what I can do is just be there with you. What I can do is just, ask if I can do anything. What I can do is pray. What I can do is all those different types of things. When I think about Jesus, who, ate with prostitutes and tax collectors, and the religious people were mad at him for that. When I picture him at those dinners, I don't picture him like, hey, here's my 3-point sermon on why your life is wrong. What I picture him doing is sitting there and saying, hey, how are you doing? Hey, how's this going? Hey, let's talk. Let's like conversating, not just dominating, but conversating with the people that culture told him wasn't supposed to talk to, right? A podcast I was listening to that was speaking on this idea of perspective yet again was saying, with somebody who has a story that you can never tell, when's the last time you've just went and asked them how they are? When's the last time you've just went and sat with them? When's the last time you've just went and tried to learn from them, because you could never learn, you can never experience it. And I just think that's a really, really big point for us to take away from this is stop trying to have all the answers, have all the words to say, one time I experienced this and it's kind of similar. No, it's probably not, right? Just emphasize with them. Just be there with them. I think that's huge.
Take a breath. I just think sometimes just take a breath and don't be offended so quickly.
Yeah.
And don't think, don't judge them so quickly as wrong. I mean, sin is sin, but that's what we're talking about. We're talking about perspective. And we're so quick to make an opinion of somebody and label them. And it's sad to me. And we don't hear and learn. It doesn't mean that you change your views on everything because of one person's view is different than yours, but you have to learn to listen. And I can't help but think a little bit about the sermon from yesterday, iron sharpening iron. Like, one of the things that I appreciate you do for me is that you point out things that are blind spots sometimes that I don't see because of sometimes just my perspective or age. And like, I appreciate that. And sometimes I will tell you like, well, the perspective that you're not seeing is this. And we need people like that. But sometimes the people that really help us and become iron in our lives that sharpen us are people that are just different and that maybe even we don't line up with in every area, but that's okay because they might sharpen us in an area that we need.
Yeah.
And so it's a challenge, right?
Yeah. There's there's a young youth pastor that I listen to who travels and speaks, and he had this really interesting story, and I think you'll like it because it speaks to us a little bit more as pastors, but it goes along with this idea of perspective. He said that he was preaching to his students, and he had this big story about his AirPods at the gym, and he was telling this whole story, and it was a whole big point about connection and all this stuff, typical pastor cheesy illustration. But he travels and he goes to this camp. And it was like an inner city camp, and he got to speak to thousands of students. And he gets up and he goes to, and he's going to do the same sermon because it was canned. He knew it. Right. And he starts going, and he's like, nobody's responding. Like my students were laughing. They thought it was hilarious. And he comes off stage and he goes over to the pastor of the church, and he's like, can I be honest? Like, I didn't feel like that landed at all. Right. And the pastor said, well, not a single kid in this room can afford AirPods. Right. And it just kind of hit him like, oh, like, yeah. I didn't even think about that. Like, I didn't even think that even, the culture of this room was different than what I usually speak to, you know? Like, yeah, I know. It's just something to think about. That is something
like I was texting last night with Devi, our friend here on our staff, who's out actually this weekend speaking at a retreat across the country in Washington State near Seattle. And he was saying, how do you know when your sermon has landed, when it really impacted? It's like you walk off the stage and you feel like you poured yourself out. I was like, dude, we should make that a podcast conversation, because I can tell you there's sometimes when you're like, you just know, and then sometimes you just know you feel like it totally flopped. But most of the times in the middle somewhere, where you don't know. And I said, but I will tell you this, it is much harder, I believe, to go to some random youth group that you don't know thousands of miles away and speak to them because you don't know them. I said, so much for me. I said, I love speaking to my congregation. I said, going as a guest speaker somewhere, if it's a different area, different group of people, different kind of congregation, I don't know them as well. And I love knowing my people because I can speak with illustrations about AirPods that I know most of them have. But it's so knowing who your audience is important, obviously, as a youth pastor, as a pastor, as somebody like that. But in every way, like sometimes we're not relating well because we're not engaged enough to realize who we're talking to.
Yeah, it's everywhere. I remember we're sharing lots of stories today, but I remember when I went to Montenegro for 2 weeks in 2017 on a mission trip. And the first time when we got there to Montenegro, we were staying in a university nobody was there for the summer, so we got to stay there in the dorms and everything. And we were in the common area hanging out right when we got there. And I was sitting there on the couch, and I put my feet up on the table because, hey, I'm hanging out. It's kind of like a coffee table looking thing, and that's what I did. And I was sitting there and talking to my friends, and they were kind of like giving me this side eye, and I'm kind of like, what's going on? Like, and there's people from Montenegro that are in this room with us, our translators, things like that. And I'm just kind of sitting there hanging out, and my friend finally hits me, and he's like, they do not do that here. Like, if you put your foot up on the table, it's a huge sign of disrespect. Right. And I just kind of slowly moved my foot off the table. But like that, I had no idea, right? And there's like, and we could talk about mission trips and traveling out of country and things like that. Yeah. I'm sure Devi, I know we use him, but like he's from Brazil. He tells me all the time his culture is so different than ours, right? And perspective is just a huge topic.
It is. We could tell stories all day about mission trips and things like that, and that's why they're so, I think, so valuable. Another reason why they're so valuable for students and for college age to get to go to, because they just seeing a different perspective of a different world, in our world, but a different country and the way people live differently, and understanding that. Yeah. Wow. Yeah.
But we've said it before on this podcast, I think in 1 or 2 episodes, but I want to go back to the point that the conversation that you have matters just as much as how you have it. Okay, so with this idea of perspective, talking to people that maybe will never feel what they feel, will never understand what they feel, how we go into that conversation matters just as much as the conversation we actually have. If I approach a conversation with somebody and I have the facts and I have it all lined out and I know that I'm going to try to argue with them, well, everything in my tone, how I talk, is going to come out that way. But if I approach a conversation with empathy, with love, with, hey, I want to understand, I don't understand, with humility, with those different type of things, that's going to reflect in the conversation. I don't have to have all the perfect words. I don't have to have all the things to say. I don't have to pretend that I'm feeling exactly what they're feeling. But if I show up with love and with empathy, like we keep going back to, and just saying, hey, I'll never have your perspective, but I want to know more. I want to understand a little bit better. I think that speaks volumes compared to anything that you and I, really anybody, could say to somebody. Yeah. You know, I don't know if you agree.
No, I do agree, because you and I have been in conversations with other people at the same time, and we've been like, within a minute, we're like, oh man, this person is a know-it-all. and there's nowhere this is going to go, but they have their perspective, and this is going to just be an annoying conversation. And and then as soon as we get away from it, like, how'd you feel about that? I'm like, oh,
yeah.
And so I don't want to be that person. I don't want to ever be that person. I mean, sometimes people will come to us because they think, we have advice, and hopefully we have biblical, godly advice for people when they're asking. And when they want our opinion, I don't think we should shy away from giving our opinion. But sometimes that's not what everybody wants.
Right.
Sometimes people just want a conversation. They don't want your opinion.
Right.
They don't want your facts. They don't want to know what CNN or Fox News said. They don't need that. They just want to talk.
Right. I think it's a big moment in every person who follows Jesus. I think there's a mature step that has to happen when you take a step back, and yet again you step away from this idea of perspective, this problem of perspective that we're talking about. I think it's a maturing step in your faith when you realize the way that you see the world is probably not the way that everybody else sees the world. I think it changes the way you love people. It changes the way that you have conversations. It changes the way that you present truth, right? I think you, as Christ followers, we all have to have that moment where we take a step back and we say, okay, in my job, in my school, in my family, and wherever, there are a handful of different perspectives and conversations.
Yes.
And the way that I approach all these different perspectives and all these different viewpoints, if I can approach it with love and humility and ask questions and figure different things out, that's going to matter so much more and reflect Jesus so much more than me showing up and saying, here's the truth. Here's what I believe. Here's the right answer. I read this on Twitter. I follow this person. Okay, that's not going to move the needle near as much than showing up and just saying, hey,
that's right.
Let's talk.
I know. So the whole thing with Christians and politics, like, I am politically conservative, and I'm not going to hide that from you. I'm not going to pretend like I'm not going to tell you, no, I am politically conservative. But listen, there are people that think differently that I believe also believe in Jesus as well. Yep. And I am trying in my life to listen to their perspectives. I might not agree with them, but I'm like, they have a perspective for a reason. Right. And I want to understand it better because I want to relate to as many people as possible. It doesn't mean I'm all of a sudden going to agree with them. Like, there are some things that I believe are immoral and I'm not going to agree with no matter what, but there are some things I need to understand better because otherwise, I mean, like, half of our country is one way and half is over here. So, like, I don't want to just focus on this half. I want to focus on everybody. Yeah. I think Jesus called us to love Republicans and Democrats and independents and black and white and red and yellow, like we sang when we were kids, that's just, I hate the division of our country, but I think so much of it goes back to your point in this podcast is perspective, is we choose to live in our bubble with our perspective and we don't want to hear anything because it's just hard. Right. It's uncomfortable.
Yeah, it is. It makes us uncomfortable and we don't like it, right?
I mean, we got into it the other day, just you, Devi, and I talking at McDonald's about this topic, a little bit about MLK Day and just perspectives. And we got kind of tense just talking about it, just, all in good fun, but in good conversation. And just because it can get very tense because when we say things, maybe we say them just to sometimes incite each other, just to get a reaction, just to kind of see. But the truth is, there's some deep things in us that are seated in us, and we need to be open-minded to listen. At least doesn't mean we change. Listen.
And I think we walked away from that conversation like, man, that was good. Like,
it was good.
We were a little bit tense, and we had a good like an hour-long conversation at McDonald's, but. It was good. Like it was different perspectives and different ideas. And I think you brought up a good point of like, this doesn't mean that you have to agree with everybody. No. Right. And I don't think we're called to do that either. I think there is a truth. There is biblical truth. You can have strong convictions. You can have all of those things, right? Yeah. We're not saying everybody you listen to, oh man, I'm just apathetic about everything. And I'm kind of neutral on every issue. Yeah. And we're not saying that either.
You don't have to label everybody either. And like, well, I walk away from that. You guys are woke, because of the way you think about certain things. No, like, I think it's just so easy to get frustrated and just like throw my hands up. I just want it to be easy. Right. But that's not life.
It's not black and white.
No.
A lot of these conversations that we're having are not. No. Right? A lot of these conversations are bigger than that. And when you take a step back, you take a deep breath, you realize your perspective might be different than this person, then kind of that gray area starts to flood in. You realize, okay. Like this is a bigger conversation than maybe what I used to believe or what I held at one point.
Correct.
So anyway, we're going to wrap this conversation up, but I kind of did want to end on that point of with this podcast as a whole. We're going to keep trying to present different conversations, topics, guests that make you guys think. Okay, that's a big reason why we started this, was to create conversations and present conversations and ideals and topics that maybe challenge you guys. And so what I want to challenge you with as we end today is don't just walk away neutral from this. With these conversations, what we'd rather have you disagree with us than just be neutral. We'd rather have you disagree with us or agree with us or just think about it, wrestle with it, and make it yours. We don't want to just sit here for 45 minutes and ramble and then have you guys just turn it off and go on about your day, right? That's not why we do this.
I enjoy their conversation. No. Like I would challenge those that are listening to engage this week in one conversation with somebody that's different than you. Like, you know who I'm talking about. Right now in your mind, somebody popped into your mind, probably those that are listening. Somebody that maybe you work with or your neighbor, could be in your family, and just engage with them in an open-minded conversation.
Yeah, could be politically, it could be culturally, it could be anything, but just talk to somebody different than you this week. I think that's really good.
Yeah.
But if you disagree with us, let us know. If you agree with us, let us know. But don't stay neutral on these things that we're talking about. Have an opinion, wrestle with it, and come up with how you're going to live it out in the next couple weeks.
That sounds good.
Yeah. Well, anyway, this has been fun. Anything you want to add on our topic, our conversation on perspective today?
No, I don't think so.
Okay. Well, then we will see you next week on the In All Things podcast. Have a good week. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of the In All Things podcast. Our challenge for you today is to send this episode to one person. Seriously, think of somebody right now that could use this conversation and send it to them. If you have any questions, feedback, or topic ideas, please send them to podcast@sycamorecreek.org, and make sure you follow us on Instagram and Facebook at Sycamore Creek Church so that you can always see what's going on in our world. If this conversation helped you at all, make sure you share it, leave a review, and subscribe so that you don't miss out on a single episode. We love you, God loves you, and we'll see you next week on the In All Things podcast.